Hi, so we're going to be looking at Snare, and this is a jazz track. That's the kind of music I tend to specialize in, and what we're dealing with here is a really common problem that you get in jazz tracks that you have to deal with in the mix. So I hope you're going to find this interesting and useful. With jazz, oftentimes the intricate, quieter snare work is crucial, not just to the expression of the drummer themselves, but all the rhythmic flow, energy flow, and rhythmic interplay that's going on with all those quiet, intricate snare notes, sometimes called ghost notes. All of that is being interacted with by the other players. So they're listening to that and they're playing off of it and interacting with all of that. So it's really crucial to hear that clearly, because that kind of interaction is what a lot of jazz is all about, a big part of what it's all about. So you really need to hear that clearly. So what we had here in a fairly typical modern jazz recording in a small studio, small room that was deadened, pretty deadened, was not ideal. It wasn't by any means a bad drum sound. It's a good drum sound, but once things got busy in an up-tempo, fairly busy arrangement, it was really hard to hear, virtually impossible to hear all the detail of the snare. So the challenge here, which is a pretty common challenge in this kind of music, was to get those detailed snare, intricate snare hits up so that you could hear them and hear how people were interacting with them, but without making the snare sound over-compressed or taking it too far away from how we wanted it to sound. So in another track, I might treat the snare incredibly differently, and I've done some other videos which were more progressive rock based, and we're treating the snare really differently because it was about the accents and the timekeeping more than the ghost notes. Whereas here, it's that intricate snare work, so it's a very different treatment. But I hope you find this useful, and let's have a look. So here we are in Logic. And today, as you know, we're concentrating on the snare drum. But what I'm going to do is play you the whole mix to start with. And I'm going to play it before and after it was mixed. So I'm going to start with everything bypassed. All you've got is the panning there and the levels, which are approximately the same as the mixed version. And this is pretty much how it sounded when it came to me from the studio. So have a listen to this, and then we'll listen to it with the mixing and plugins all back in. And now listen to the mix as it stands. So a huge difference, obviously. One of the things to notice is just that there's so much more space in the mix now. You can hear in and around the instruments, and therefore you can hear the details of the instruments far better, and you can hear what everybody's doing much more clearly. So all without, it's just really quite muddy, and it's quite hard to hear the details. So now I want you to just have another quick listen to it before, with everything bypassed, and just hone in on the snare and listen to what are sometimes called the ghost notes on the snare, or the quieter, intricate work on the snare. With a drummer like this, that is incredibly important, all that detail. This is one of the great jazz drummers in the UK, Asaf Circus, and he does incredible stuff on the snare. And as a lot of jazz drummers do, a lot of intricate playing, and it's so important because that's what it's all about. That's what his expression is those intricate notes, and that's where the flow and the feeling and all that is going on, and the communication between the different instruments, the different musicians, is going on that level. So all that intricate snare work and all the energy flow that's going on in that the other musicians are reacting off of that, and he's reacting off of them, and so that's the interplay of jazz. It's a big part of what goes on in jazz, and so you really need to hear all those details, or you're missing half of what's going on. So we'll have a listen now again to the mix without the plugins, and just listen to the snare and notice just how difficult it is to hear the details of what he's doing. It's pretty hard to hear the details, and now we're going to put the plugins back in. So you can hear much better now, and you can hear every little interaction, how he's playing with the piano player and pushing and driving with the piano player, and they're playing off each other. And that's all in that intricate snare work. So that's why it's so important to be able to hear it. So, plus the tone of the snare sounds better, and other things about it too have improved. So let's have a look at how I did that. I'm going to bring the mixer over here so you can see that. So I'll solo the snare to start with, and you can see here we've got the top snare mic and the bottom snare mic, and I balance those, and I phase align them. Always worth phase aligning the top and bottom snare mic. Just flipping the polarity is not necessarily going to get it lined up as well as it could be, or it may not even improve it. But aligning it properly with a plug-in like this one, this is a good one, the M-Auto Align. And there are others that do it just as well. I just like that one. It's easy to use and it does a good job. Even then, it doesn't necessarily improve the sound of the snare, but it's always worth trying, because sometimes it improves it a lot. So that's the first thing I do. And on this, I felt that the improvement was minimal, actually, not huge. So I'm not going to waste time on that. But yeah, sometimes it transforms, it really brings more body into the snare, but this one was actually sounding pretty good without it. So I'm going to solo the snare, and I'm going to just bypass everything here, and then solo it and then bring it back in, so you can hear what it's like with and without. So by no means a bad snare sound without the processing, but it's a bit, by comparison, it's a little tinny, I guess you could say, and certainly not as detailed and nice tone-wise. So on its own like this, it sounds maybe a little bit hyped on the top end, and maybe even I would pull back slightly on that on a final pass of the mix, but in context of the rest of the mix, that top end helps the snare detail come through, especially in a busy mix like this. So let's have a look at what I've done. I'm going to take that out, it's just level matching. So to start with here, I almost always, if I've got any kind of analog emulation plugins, I'm going to have a level matching plugin, a plugin to get the level up to 0, around about 0, to get it at the right line level. So next thing I've got is drum leveler. Now with this, I'm using this to level the snare. So that you get the odd really loud hit that isn't happening right now, but in some later parts of the track, he really whacks it, and it's just popping out a bit too much. And I don't want to compress it or limit it, because you can always hear that when the snare whacks against a limiter or a compressor hard. You can always hear that artifact from that. But this is a different method of controlling levels, and it's completely transparent. You cannot hear it. It treats the snare almost like a sample and pulls it down a bit like you would with your fader, if you could do it quickly enough. So that's just there as a safety, really, for the odd loud hit. Not happening right now. And the rest of the drums that stay under the threshold are completely untouched, so it's not compressing or anything like that. Now we come to this, which is an emulation of an SSL desk. There's lots of them around. This is one I just really particularly like. Really like the tonal quality of it on drums. I mean, all SSL I like on drums, but this one, for some reason, I've got most of the other ones. This one, I always end up going back to this one. So what am I doing is I'm just I'm boosting a bit here, about 2K, and a bit, 5.5K, pulling out a bit here at, I guess it's about 700 Hertz there. There's a bit of mud there, and then a bit of boost here around 150, just to give it a bit more body. Quite a tight Q there, medium Q there. So I'm going to take this in and out so you can hear what that's like. So basically I was after hearing a lot more of the kind of snare, the snare wires, so that you could really hear the detail. And then what have we got going on here? Have we got any compression going on here? I'm guessing that there's nothing going on here with the compression right now. I'm guessing that I set this up to grab the snare a little bit more in the louder parts, but it's basically not doing anything. So that's the EQ, and then here I've got another EQ, and here again I'm just bringing out a little bit more top end. So in and out. So this brings up a really interesting concept, and that is that different frequencies affect how you hear them, each other. They interact. So before adding this EQ, from the previous EQ I'd done, it was sounding pretty toppy. Almost like too much. And here I'm adding even more top. The interesting thing is, because I add some more bottom here, it has the effect of pulling the top back so that it no longer sounds too upper midi toppy. So just check that out again. I'm going to pull this in and out. So now it sounds about right on its own, maybe not as you'd expect, but in the mix it sounds about right. So I'm going to just pull this out again. No, I won't do that yet to hear it in context. And by the way, I would never mix a snare like this on its own. I'd always do it in the context of music, and I'd solo a little bit to listen to it for a bit soloed, to do this and that. But in general, it needs to be mixed in the context of the rest of the music, otherwise you don't know what you're doing. what I mean is you don't know what you're doing. What I mean is you can't hear what it's going to be like. You can't hear it in context, and therefore you're kind of working blind, as it were. So it's getting a lot closer to what I'm after. So a lot of nice body and a lot of definition. So then I felt it needed even more detail bringing out. And I ended up using this Unisum compressor, which is just an amazing compressor, to bring out the detail of the snare without actually compressing the dynamic range. And it is possible to do that with the compressor if you set it up right. So let's have a listen to this in and out. So you can hear there's still plenty of dynamic range. When he hits it harder, it gets a lot louder, and it doesn't over-compress when he hits it harder. So this is acting more on the low-level information and bringing that up a little bit. So it's just bringing up those quieter hits a bit louder, so that in context, which you'll now hear, and I'll bring this in and out in context, you can just hear them a little bit better. You hear how that really brings up those quieter notes. So, and this is an amazing compressor. It's a mastering compressor, but it is fantastic at doing other things too. It's basically incredibly versatile. Oh, I didn't mention the reverb, did I? So I added a plate reverb here, a Lexicon plate reverb, which I just felt really worked in this context. It smoothed it a little bit. I'll take that out. I could have used a room, and I tried a room, but I felt that it was not really smoothing enough for this particular track. So I brought in this plate, and it's not so much because I really wanted a huge plate wash, but I felt it needed to be smoothed out a little bit, and that's another thing that you can do with the reverb. So you're just going to hear this with and without the reverb. You can hear how it smooths it out, and without it, it sounds a little jumpier and rougher. But when it's smoothed out a little bit, without actually affecting anything about the snare, it's not compressing it, it's just filling a little bit behind it. And that's what's great about plate reverbs, is they're very good for that kind of thing and for working with affecting tone of things as well. But that's a whole other video. So of course there are 100 different ways to mix a snare. And this is one track, and this is one approach with a particular drummer, and I might approach it really, really differently in another context. And in fact, I have done other videos on snare in a very different context, so you might find those useful as well to have a look at. But I hope you found this useful, and if you did, please subscribe and give it a like, and hope to see you next time.